Would you be able to trace the process by which you made the decision to become an exhibiting artist? It's not an easy role to take on. Very few actually do. So I'm kind of curious, in your case, where that decision was made, or what you thought about at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't remember a particular point in time where I decided to be an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been into art, like ever since I was a kid. So there was never a moment where I thought, I don't want to be doing this anymore, but I do want to be an artist now. There was never sort of a crossover point in time. It's something that I've just always done. But I think an important juncture in my life, or a turning point in my life, came from going from being an art student to being an artist outside of school, and that shift of identity. So when you're in art school, you're a student, and that's what your identity is, and by the time you've reached the end of your schooling, you've probably been a student for most of your life. And then when graduating from school, it's, the support structure falls out from underneath you, and you have to decide what your identity is going to be. So you can no longer hold on to the student identity. So what is my identity? So when I left school, there was a definitive decision to continue to be committed to art. It wasn't, should I be an artist or should I not be an artist, but just an awareness of needing to rejig my own identity from being a student to being an artist. And those early stages involved things like sharing a studio with a friend, working on projects with other recent graduates, and just kind of tapping into anything that I could at that time to begin that process.
Where did you study?
I studied at NASCAT.
Ah.
Mm-hmm.
And NASCAT's a great place. And did you form bonds with peers at the time that continued past graduation?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that, the community that started off at the time, the friendships that started during that time still live on today. And those relationships that started at that time and were a part of that transition from being a student to being an artist, the people involved in that at that time, the other artists that I connected with and did work with and did collaborative projects with, it was a really significant time, and those people were significant to developing that.
Mm-hmm. And I assume to cement your conviction that you could actually become an exhibiting artist.
Yeah, but I mean, exhibiting was only one aspect of it. Like, you start off with you need space and time to work, so figuring out that side of it. But then, of course, the exhibition is often the end point, or the thing that you're working towards. Yeah.
In those years, while at school and in the aftermath, were you forming a concept of what an artist can do, or what an artist actually does, in order to understand better where this is taking you?
Well, I see art as a meeting point. I see art as the beginning of a conversation. It's a visual language that people can tap into. It's a site where you can think, where you can have conversations. Hopefully a new thought is sparked, or an investigation. I see it as a starting point. in terms of like what the function is with like with a viewer. For me, of course, is much deeper. It's how I think and how those thoughts are continuing to develop over time.
So it's a reflexive process in many respects. Every action, as it were, you take as an artist becomes a basis upon which to rethink the position that an artist takes and what an artist actually can accomplish.
Well, I think, to go back to what I was saying previously, like I see my art as a starting point for a thought or a conversation. That it's a meeting point, or it forms the basis of where a community can come together. It's where thoughts can be generated or discussed, or like that kind of thing. For me personally, it's just it's a compulsion that I can't really explain, other than that I just have always done it and continue to do it, and it's an ongoing development. I don't know what else
Well,
to
maybe
say.
I can just continue that first thought. I'm kind of curious. There's another large question that artists face, which is quite apart from the relations we have within the system with critics and curators and such, which I'll come back to. There is the question of the general audience, the general public, and what responsibilities or what anticipations an artist has with respect to that relationship. There are many who feel an artist should have a strong relationship to the public and act accordingly. There are others, of course, who say, well, how can one deal with such a general public? What are your thoughts on that? What do you expect from the general public with respect to your work?
I believe that my work is actually quite approachable, and I think that I think that it links to the materials that I choose. So I'm predominantly working with existing objects and materials that are commonly found, at least in my world, and that I'm presenting them or representing them, transforming them in some way, but because I'm starting with a telephone book or a ruler or an envelope, like things that are common, I think, in everyday life, that my hope or my intention is that people, that it's an entry point for people, that it's something that they can connect to. And I've certainly received that kind of feedback from people, like general viewers that are coming into the gallery, not people that not artists, people that are that have specialization in art, but people that are just like taking a chance and stepping into that gallery, and then they look at the work, and because often those objects or materials are a part of their reference point or something that they can relate to, then I see that as an entry point. So it kind of takes away any kind of intimidation. So it's a starting point. They can look at it and go, oh, this is a yardstick, a wooden yardstick. I have one of those in my garage or whatever. So I think that those, because those materials are common, that people can link to them, and that to me is something important. I like the work to have an entry point for almost anyone.
Kind of interested how you would characterize the practice that you've been developing, and I guess by that I mean what apart from the processes by which you produce the work and the materials with which you play, what core idea, if we can put it that way, what leitmotif maybe runs through your understanding when you're thinking of making work, when you anticipate what you've done and anticipate what you can do?
Well, I think my work is really rooted in materials and processes. But what I do with those materials and processes is that I want to stay true to the object. I want to transform it in some way and represent it in some way, but that I want to stay true to the object. So I like the idea that when I'm working with a material, that it is both whatever it was and something new. So, and in an ideal scenario, it's more than just those two, but that that objects can be presented in a multifaceted way, and I think that that's really the root of what I do with my work, is that I'm trying to say that things are not static, that you can look and think about things from different perspectives. Yeah.
There's actually a small quote here that I wouldn't mind running by you, and it's yours. I'll start with this one. I seek out an internal logic of things, and this leads me to subjectively shift, expand, invert, or simply transform the materials. I'm interested by this term, internal logic. And by that I mean, you talked about the object. I'm fascinated by objects. And I guess we all are. What is an object? What do we do with it? How do we relate to it? Are these thoughts, are these the concerns that you bring to the work?
Yeah, that there's somehow some like embedded meaning in an object or material. Like if you look at a telephone book, we know that it's a record of names of people in the city, so it's like a community, or it's like you can read into objects and understand like basically what it is. So I think that what I'm doing with my art is wanting to tap into the truth of that object, or its objectness, but then also add on like multiple layers, ideally.
In thinking about objects, are you thinking of this duality, as it were, the fact that objects can perform a function, but they are also a material? They're an object, as it were, before they're a function. Are these interesting concerns for you?
Yeah, that an object can have a function, but that it can also be a material. It can also be something that's transformed in a sculptural way. And when I'm choosing or figuring out how to transform an object, I'm thinking about retaining its objectness, whatever the hammerness of the hammer, but then also bringing in multi layers of potential meaning. So maybe not just a duality of it is that thing and it is not that thing at the same time, but I think if a work is really successful, then there's even more layers than just a duality. And I think that that's rooted in what my general perspective is in life, which is that you can see things in multiple perspectives.
Yeah, what I want to ask is a question about process. And I have a sense that process is very important to you, as in the materials and the ideas coming together under process. So I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about process and the processes you use to make work. And I recognize there are different works, so there are different processes, no doubt, but maybe we can select one and talk about the process involved in that particular work.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes ideas begin with a hunch. Like you think that something work, and then I try to figure it out in the studio. So I work with the actual materials if I can. In some instances, the site that I'm working toward is much larger than my studio, and so then I can work with maquettes or models. And for example, this is a maquette that I made for a piece called Parallel Lines, and it was created for the Koffler Gallery. And the resulting work uses a surveyor's measuring tape. And so I made this kind of scale model of the space and used thread instead of the actual measuring tape. And I think that this length represents something like 35 feet. Mm-hmm. So, a space that just I didn't have access to just within my studio. And so this helps me to figure out proportions. It helps me to figure out how the space can be used, measurements, dimensions, that kind of thing. But something that was particularly interesting about this was that the maquette only got me so far, and that when I went to install in the gallery, what I realized was that this first starting point needed to be the entire length of the wall, that it truly had to be anchored in the space. Otherwise, it felt a bit arbitrary, like why I would position this here in this way. And so the resulting work uses this height of the ceiling as its starting point, and it's half as deep as it is high, and it's twice as long as it is high. And so, like, working in this kind of three-dimensional way, even though I had done sketches, two-dimensional sketches, and I had some ideas in my mind of how it could work out, I really had to figure it out physically, and I feel like that's a really strong part of my process. And often I rely on mathematics or geometry, but my level of mathematics or geometry is, pretty rudimentary compared to someone who's dedicated their whole life to math. And so it can only really take me so far, and then I find that I have to actually make the thing, or make a version of it, make a smaller version of it, to figure out if it's going to work, what the proportions are, that kind of thing.
So in some respects, excuse me, that question of internal logic applies equally to the site that you would be deploying the work in, that somehow the site itself has an internal logic, and one has to respect that.
Yeah, that the space itself is sending messages, is helping to define the work itself. That I'm responding to the site, to the scale, to the architecture, and it's providing information on how this work can take form.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because as you talk, it occurs to me that we walk through the world. I walk into a gallery, I'm walking through the world. I walk down the street, whatever it is, but I rarely think about the logic of the situation I'm in. If I go into the gallery, which is after all a space where I should be thinking about the logic of the situation, what you were describing is a means by which to remind me of that logic, so that I no longer become a flaneur, you might say. I actually become attentive. Mm-hmm. Would you say attentiveness is one of the things that you're looking for or expect to happen, whether people actually think about that or not?
Whether the viewer thinks about being attentive? Mm-hmm. Well, the feedback I get is that it does make people attentive. Mm-hmm. Like, I've had comments where people say, I'll never look at a ruler the same way, or I'll never look at an envelope the same way. I think I think that those kind of transformations or repositioning of the objects make people look at the thing in a different way.
Their relationship to it.
Their relationship to it. This piece with the surveyor's measuring tape, it's the entire measuring tape, and it's not cut in any way. It's been repositioned in this unusual way, tracing a space that it wouldn't conventionally trace. But at the end of this continuous line is actually the instrument, the coil itself, the case or holder that holds the measuring tape. And that's definitely a conscious decision that I'm not cutting it off and making it look neat and tidy or whatever, but that I'm saying what it is. You know, it is what it is, but it's also something else.
We talked about storytelling a little bit earlier in another discussion, and it strikes me as you were talking that I'm thinking, so in a way, these materials have a story to tell. These objects have a story to tell. We could call it their internal logic. It's kind of a story. Do you see it as the material telling a story about itself?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good way of putting it. The materials telling a story. Maybe I'm putting my own story on it, but then also the viewer often will add their own story as well. But in terms of that internal logic, I'm studying that object maybe in a way that hasn't really been considered before, like as a sculptural object, but also as a functional object.
Theory a few minutes ago, but I'm kind of interested whether literature plays a part in your, not necessarily in your practice, I don't know, but do you read literature much, or do you feel it plays any role in how you push your thinking forward?
Well, I'm really fascinated by writers and how they can articulate ideas and thoughts and feelings in a poetic way that is so beyond what I could personally achieve linguistically. I like fiction and nonfiction. Some of the writers that I've read, Michael Ondaatje, one of his books directly, and a quote from one of his books directly inspired one of my series, actually, where he, in a wonderfully poetic way, of course, talked about how one's memories, when we reflect on our memories and talk about our memories, we talk about them like the shattered lens of a kaleidoscope, that it's repeated fractions, that repeated fragments of images and thoughts that are distorted and repeated in some way, and that influenced a whole series of work that I did with newspapers and cutting them up and putting them back together in kaleidoscopic patterns. I also was reading about a 19th century scientist, and he was trying to measure the world, as it were, and he would have all of these finely calibrated instruments and taking them into the Amazon, but nature would not have it. Nature was not going to be so easily confined and defined by his scientific measures. And this really spoke to me in regards to my interest in measurement, how measurement is this rule, and we go to it, we use it, but it often doesn't quite live up to the task, or the thing that we're trying to measure is always in flux or is resisting being measured. And in this literary example, he had taken all these beautifully finely calibrated instruments into the Amazon, but then they wouldn't work because of the level of the humidity. So it was like nature saying, no, I will not be confined, I will not be defined by your measure. And yeah, I really was inspired by that kind of resistance to order, like trying to place order, but there's a resistance to order as well.
Well, that's fascinating,
Yeah.
since we are here in your studio, surrounded by the instruments of order. And I'm kind of curious about this question of the broken kaleidoscope and the consequences or the implications it has for how we remember things, or how we try to order. Memory as an attempt to order our experience. So I'm kind of curious about what I then take to be a certain ironic relationship that the work that you're engaged in has to do with itself, with its possibilities. That in fact, maybe I can ask this question as a follow-through. In the contemporary world that we're occupying at the moment, and contemporary world shifts all the time. You were just quoting 19th century scientists. So that contemporary is radically different from our own, or it would appear to be. And perhaps nature anticipated what our contemporary moment would be by virtue of this inability to actually measure the world adequately. That in fact measurement, while we continue to do it, as a sponsor, measurement in some respects evades us. First question is, do you see this as something that we have taken to heart in the contemporary moment, and that in fact the broken kaleidoscope or the instrument that can't properly measure the world really form a moment that is uncertain?
Well, I definitely think that uncertainty is a given. Uncertainty is the only constant. I don't know if I can speak about the world at large, but it's all of those things that we're discussing, definitely connect to me personally, and I think that, like, when I think about measurement and its inadequacy to clearly define it, I think that it has to do with my relationship to order. That I'm drawn to order. I'm drawn to order, but at the same time I resist order, and that I have kind of a natural ability for order, but at the same time, just because I have that natural ability with order and pattern, it doesn't. I don't want to rely on it, or I don't fully trust it in some way. Like when things are too perfect, I want to make them imperfect somehow.
Disturb the order. So my other question would be, following on that, would be a question about, I was just suggesting it was a kind of ironic stance then that one could take, at least as a viewer, if not yourself, to this relationship between ordering, the tools of ordering, and the uncertainties that creep in as one attempts to order things. And I'm kind of curious if in fact you would see your work as, I'll use that word again, ironic, and maybe we can toss that one back and forth, and perhaps the other word, paradoxical. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Paradoxical, I relate to that word better than ironic. I don't know why, but I feel like ironic is more like a joke or tongue-in-cheek or something. Like there's something sly about it that I don't feel like my work has. Like I think that my work is quite sincere, and I think that I am sincere, but that I do see paradoxes in my own world, in the world around me. So I think paradox is maybe a more accurate word for what I'm trying to tap into.
One thing about paradox is that it tends to engender illicit sense of humor, a sense of the comedy of things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find comedy an interesting trope? An interesting way of addressing things?
I think if there's humor in my work, it's probably pretty dry humor. Pretty dry Nordic humor. I think that there's an element of absurdity. I think there's an element of absurdity in my work that can be interpreted as funny, and I've definitely gotten that reaction. So putting objects and materials in unconventional ways can sometimes be absurd or amusing, but because I think the work has such an austere, minimal appearance, it's like harder to tap into, or it takes a little longer to tap into the humor of it.
I'll have to say that on occasion I've seen your work, and in a way, sometimes the work almost seems like a clown, like a bit clownish. It's like, I don't know, acting out something like a clown would, exacerbating something perhaps. Do you see any clowning in the work?
No, I don't know. I don't know what a clown really does.
Yeah, exactly. Clown is a very uncertain creature, isn't it? You're never quite sure what the clown is doing.
Yeah. Well, I suppose in that regard, that the way I'm presenting or representing objects is in some way multifaceted, that you maybe know, you can recognize what you're looking at, but you're seeing it in a different way. You're seeing it in a conventional way.
I just want to draw this one out. There's a certain uncertainty about the times that we live in, Kristiina. Do you see that as a strategy that your work is engaged with?
I don't know if I don't know, I feel like I'm engaged with it, whether I like to be or not, because I do live in this world and it is uncertain. I don't know if I don't set out to make art that is illustrating that, but I can see that there's a correlation between the uncertainty of our world and our lives, and then the sort of shifting perspectives of what materials and objects can be or can mean.
Curators. In your experience of working with curators, Kristiina, how would you characterize that relationship, or what do you expect from the curator, or how do you find curators functioning with respect to your practice?
Oh, I love working with curators because then you're not in isolation. You know, someone who's invested in your work and having a conversation, who has a vested interest in seeing the work developed and developed to the point of being, you know, the best version of that artwork that it could be. Just simply having the dialogue, the feedback, I find it really valuable.
Mm-hmm. So they become, in a sense, almost a participant in the work, or a joint, I wouldn't go so far as to say joint author, but at least a means by which you can see your work through the eyes of the other. Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, once once you leave art school, you find out pretty quickly that, that there are very few people out there that are willing to invest that kind of time and energy to consider your work and to think about it and articulate it and present it back to you and challenge you. So I've had great experiences with curators where that relationship is formed, where there's a back and forth, and the work can be enriched from that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Does that similarly apply to critical response, to the way critics have engaged with you?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some really great writers out there, and really it can only be a compliment when someone has decided to really consider your work and investigate it and write those thoughts down. And in a way it can be a bit of a reflection or a mirror, like you can see, is what I'm trying to say effective? Is it getting out there, by what they write? But then also, if they're really good, then they can also bring something to the work that you'd never thought of before, and that can be really enriching. And then if they take it even a step further, where they're critiquing the work, I listen, because if someone's really actually invested that kind of time and energy to think about your work, and then has a critique embedded in that writing as well, then I listen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a good compliment to the curator, because the curator, of course, is on your side, whereas the critic isn't necessarily.
Yeah, I've found with writers, for the most part, they're coming from a genuine place. They're coming from a sincere place where they're trying to parse out what the work is about, and also, they're bringing in their own perspective, their own intellect, their own research. So it can be quite expanded from what your work is, which can be pretty interesting. But for the most part, I've found that writers are coming from a genuine place, that they're really only writing about it because they find they're tapping into something that interests them within the work.
Do you think artists write about art in a way that's different than critics? Have you had any experience with that, or any thoughts about the difference between an artist who writes and of course, a professional critic who writes?
Well, it's funny. I was just rereading some passages from Patti Smith's Just Kids, and she's an artist writing about being an artist, and I think the reason why I love that book so much is that she is able to speak in a really poetic way about what it's like being an artist, and what those internal struggles are, and what the daily life is like, and the conversations and the development and the struggles. And I think that that's probably something that artists are able to tap into more so than an art critic or an art historian, is the actual lived experience of being an artist.
The question of career comes up quite frequently with certainly friends and family. How does one construct a career? How are you going to make money? How are you going to support yourself? All those questions, of course. But more generally, a sense of admiration sometimes that one understands in people who haven't chosen art as a career, and find it amazing that one actually did and that one does. And I guess the sheer perseverance that one understands is required to construct and maintain a career and persevere. What are your thoughts on the difficulties of maintaining a career as an artist and the perseverances that you have to bring to that?
Well, I've really made art my whole life. And I'm married to an artist, Adam David Brown. So our home is art, our studios are in our home. It's what we talk about at any given moment. It's how I socialize, it's how I spend it's how I spend any given amount of time that I have, you know, whether it's going to openings or talking to friends and colleagues or being in the studio. So I feel like I've just made it my whole life. And the idea of perseverance, I think that every artist struggles with needing and wanting more time in the studio, but I think that the way that I've made it work for myself is that whatever time I do have, I'm disciplined in using that time.
Of course, you do have another job,
Mm-hmm.
another support structure at the ROM. So I guess the fact that one can work on the basis of that security becomes one of the, I guess, the support structures for the perseverance.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's something that I've discovered within myself, that that having a certain amount of life stability allows me to take risks creatively. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know you don't want to talk about the ROM, so I won't ask.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it too much, but yes, you can still ask me.
If I were to ask, all artists, almost all artists, actually have a second career, apart from the basic career as an artist. And those careers run all over the map. In your case, working at the Royal Ontario Museum would seem like the perfect accompaniment in some respects to your role as an artist. Do you see it that way?
That I love the collection, you know, that I'm surrounded by beautiful things that are made by fellow artists, and that because I am an artist, I take the time to look at the objects, and I do take pleasure in that. And then I also think that the methodical way that one works in a museum is compatible to my personality and the way that I.
So I'd be interested to your gut reaction to the question of the art system. And the art system, of course, comprises collectors, galleries, the institutions like the museum, and of course the politics of the system itself, the layers of influence and relationships that construct it. Any thoughts about the art system?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've tapped into various elements of the art system, like commercial art scene, public art galleries, showing at public art galleries, artist-run centers, that kind of thing. I think that the one thing that I reflected upon when thinking about the art system is how, coming from NASCAD, NASCAD is like a decidedly non-commercial environment with its conceptual roots, and so I never thought about being an artist represented by a commercial gallery. But then when I met Michael Klein at MKG 127, that really propelled me in a way that I hadn't expected. And I think it provided structure for me, but it also, you know, from Michael, like having that kind of support, having an expectation, you know, being given shows, you must, you know, make new work and live up to that, you know, having to live up to somebody's expectations of you. And so even though I didn't set out to really operate so much in the commercial world, it's ended up being really supportive and and pushing me, for sure.
This term zeitgeist and understand what we're doing in this contemporary moment as a kind of zeitgeist. And I want to link that to the question of, well, broadly speaking, authenticity. You know, what is it that we do that is somehow real or somehow fundamental? Any thoughts about what could be considered to be authentic? How do you deal with that?
Well, in regards to authenticity, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, my work is coming from within. It's coming through processes. It's coming from just spending the time and working through ideas in the studio. Of course, I'm influenced by my environment and my background from day one. You know, you're a composite of all the influences in your whole life, things that you know are just simply things that you've chosen and things you have not chosen, and that affects you. But yeah, ultimately, I think that the authenticity comes from the work coming from within.